difference between professionalization and amateurism is a muddy line, and it changes because how we define amateurism has changed. I understand why anybody would look on paper and think, yeah, Florida State, Clemson, UNC, that they're all gone. But so much is changing with the core assumptions of how college sports works right now that I am not willing to say, put anything in ink for what the sport looks like in 5 or 6 years.
All right, welcome on into Tying It Together with Tim Boyum. I am Tim Boyum, and this week we are going to talk some politics, but in context of college sports with John. Look at your shirt you have on. Did they win or something this week? Are they good?
We'll see. We'll see how things go.
We are huge sports fans, but politics has been intertwined in this. And after Labor Day weekend and all the games, I just thought it was a really good time to try to put into context what is happening. And I think after, John, you hear this interview, there's still a lot of questions.
Yeah, and I mean, it's, you'll see this interview coming up. It's the fact that even our guest has been able to make a career on this the past half a decade really speaks to how much of college athletics is not happening on the field.
Yeah, it's wild. There's so much changing with all the money in it, the somewhat professionalization of it. I don't think it's ruined college sports. I'll just put that out there. I don't think it has. It's changed it. But I was we'll talk about this a little bit afterwards, but I was at the Carolina game. I never seen Carolina football like that, for better and worse, all in the same game. But you're a purist, I think, at heart about college sports, right?
Yeah. I am not really bothered about the direction it's gone. I think it's just the direction that everything has gone. But I mean, I'm speaking as somebody who, drives 70 hours a year to watch my team 4 times. So
yeah.
You're
right up there.
I recognize that I am a bit of a different case than most people interested in college
although
sports.
you are paying a lot more for it.
I sure am.
All right, so Matt Brown is our guest. You actually teed me up to this guy, right? So what do you know about this guy?
Yeah, I've been following him for a while. I think it was around 2020 he started covering exclusively off the field college athletics stories, and I am very into that, the whole background of it, and all the factors at play. He's been on top of realignment stuff, days before some other people have it. He is super plugged in. He's he puts out his newsletter, Extra Points. It's super informative. Let me tell you, he was the guy to go to for when the football video game was in development. He was, nobody had things that he had. He put in FOIA request after FOIA request just for the elements of songs and cheers that schools submitted to the game.
It's wild.
He is on top of it. So he's great. Matt Brown from Extra Points. If you're at all interested in this side of college sports, he is a must follow.
ExtraPointsNB.com is the website. You can subscribe to the newsletter. And again, as I mentioned, there's politics involved in this. Congress, could they get involved? Do they want to? Does the president get involved? So here it is, Matt Brown. First of all, Matt, it's great to see you. Appreciate you being on. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got onto kind of this part of the sports business.
Sure. I definitely run a more unique publication, I think, in college sports world. Like Extra Points, the newsletter that I run, just covers off-the-field stories in college sports. It's about policy and labor law and NIL and higher education. And some of that came from the fact that I wasn't always a reporter. I used to be a teacher. I came from an academic background and academic home. And then some of this is also a realization that even though I care very much about what happens on the field, there's 76 reporters at the UNC TCU game. And it's going to be difficult for me to be in that same press box and write something different or interesting about, North Carolina's quarterback play that everybody else isn't doing. But when it comes to talking about the off-the-field stuff, which is increasingly a bigger part of college sports, there's a lot of beat writers that can't focus on that because they have to go to practice. They have to go. You talk to the high school recruits to see where they're going. So I could focus on that, and that's helped me build a sustainable business.
Yeah, you could make an argument that the biggest stories in sports have been off the field in college athletics the last 5 years or so, right?
I don't want to say this was necessarily fortuitous timing because Extra Points launched after I got laid off during the COVID pandemic. So I certainly didn't feel particularly fortunate when this was happening. But you're right. Between the transfer portal, between NIL, between potential federal legislation, conference realignment, and existential changes to the higher education model in this country, they've all been massive off the field stories. I have had no shortage of things to write about, even though sometimes I like to joke with my readers and my wife that I wish I was still working in Preston at times sometimes.
All right, so we're taping this the morning after the debacle in Chapel Hill. What's your hot take based on your background and what you do about what's going on there and what happened?
I'm not super shocked that Carolina lost. I'm a little surprised it was as embarrassing as it was, but I think if we were to honestly look at this roster and compare that to the rosters of teams that are trying to compete for conference championships, there's not the level of experience and proven talent here, but there's been even at other years in UNC. To say nothing of what Clemson or at Florida State or some other schools in this league have. I think 7.5, 8-ish wins was probably the ceiling for this group. What surprised me the most about this offseason, honestly, isn't so for North Carolina specifically, isn't so much about Belichick, which we all understand the storylines there about why that's a controversial or strange decision. But you could talk me into a world where that works. I think what's most surprising is that UNC is paying absolute top of the market rates to Michael Lombardi as a GM. Whose comments in the press and who the feedback I've gotten throughout the college sports industry is not prepared or does not understand what roster building in college sports is like right now. You could have gotten the exact same thing for 30% of what you're paying this guy. And I think that's going to come up a little bit longer as we get into the season, realize, well, the depth isn't there and this roster isn't matched to what UNC really wants to do.
Yeah, so part of the thing that they're touting is sort of this professionalization of college sports, and that's what Lombardi and Belichick bring to it. Is this a lesson, at least so far, that it's not exactly totally translatable?
I definitely think it's not completely translatable. When you are running a front office and you're doing player personnel in the NFL, everyone's salary is public. And just about everybody is working off of the same data sources for tracking on-field player performance. And when you go into college, not only do you not know what everybody else here is making, you have way more games and you don't have the same kind of standardized data to make comparisons one-to-one. And you have to think about a whole lot of other things that are never part of the NFL. There's no compliance office in the NFL. You don't have to worry about someone's JUCO credits transferring. You don't have to go across campus and try to get Debbie in accounts receivable to make sure a transcript goes through to make sure everybody is on the same page. And you're dealing with 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds, not grown men. So I don't doubt that there is a lot of people within the football wing at North Carolina that have a lot of NFL experience that know ball and know how to evaluate players. But what I've written a lot about the GM role in college sports on Extra Points. I've talked to a lot of people. There are some pretty significant differences. I think the other big difference is where that GM sits on the organizational chart relative to the head coach and the athletic director and who's really making choices. We don't want to completely make sweeping decisions based after 1 week, especially the first week of the season. But I am very skeptical of anybody in college football or college basketball that says we're going to be another NFL or NBA team. We're going to do things exactly like they do. Because even though you pay athletes in both places, the player acquisition model is very, very different.
So to broaden this out then for folks that don't maybe pay attention to it as closely sports-wise, where do you think we are headed then? Is it towards a mix of professionalization and what college athletics was, or is it eventually headed towards total professionalization?
I think this is a good question. And what I would tell people who maybe aren't in the exact weeds of all of this is that the difference between professionalization and amateurism is a muddy line. And it changes because how we define amateurism has changed over the last 150 years. If we were having this conversation in the 1940s or 1950s, the idea of having an athletic scholarship at all for much of this country would mean explicit professionalization, and that would be unacceptable. Now, that's nobody bats an eye about that, even if you're in the NAIA. Then it became, whether laundry money or cost of attendance was going to mean explicit professionalization. And then that line has changed now. If we define professionalization as somebody getting a salary based on what they do on the field, we are already there. And I would argue we've really probably been there as long as I've been doing this professionally, which is the last 13 years, if not my entire lifetime. I'm in my late 30s. The question now, I think, is whether we move towards a world where at least some athletes are protected by a union and collectively bargain and negotiate, and we have a more explicit employer-employee relationship like we have in the NFL or the NBA, or whether Congress and the court system intervene and we have this kind of weird hybridization. And to be honest with you, I don't trust anybody that says, I know exactly how this is going to go. I understand the momentum towards a more NFL looking model, but given how state labor law is set up in this country and given who controls the White House, who controls Congress, right? There's so much unpredictability that I don't think you can say for certain. It's absolutely possible that Trump and this current Congress decides, actually, no, we're going to explicitly ban athlete employee status, and we're going to try to codify what the world looked like in 1993. That could happen.
Well, and I wonder what it will look like, too, in a state like North Carolina that's a right-to-work state where teachers can't collectively bargain. So if they're state employees, I don't think that could work here. I think that's just interesting how that will all work out.
That's exactly it. That's true in a lot of the Southeast. That's true in a lot of the Intermountain West. You'll have some athlete rights organizations that will say, well, the solution is to make sure that UNC and NC State aren't the employer. They'll be the employers of the ACC, or they'll be the employers of Tar Heel Athletics Unlimited LLC, where a controlling stake is owned by Learfield or Playfly or somebody, and then it's a private unionization situation. And you have the NFL and the NBA unions that are still operating in Charlotte, and those athletes participate. But that does become much more complicated. The rules in New York and Illinois and Hawaii and South Carolina and Utah are all extremely different in a way that doesn't interface with the NFL as much.
So people heard NIL for so long. That has changed in some ways, right? How is that working? And I'm a big college basketball fan, so I kind of equate it to this, where the universities are sort of the NIL now, right? But they're still separate NIL. How is this all kind of playing out now?
What I would tell people, when we talk about NIL, we're really talking about two different compensation markets. You have one kind of compensation market between an athlete and some kind of brand or commercial entity that wants to do a marketing deal with somebody because they think it will make them money. So when Adidas or Puma or Nike, or for that matter, myself, I've done NIL deals, or Cookout or anybody else, wants to pay an athlete to sign some autographs or participate in a promotional event, it's because they think that will make Cookout money. And that market still exists. That market was created in 2021. It has changed, it has grown. In some places it's contracted, but it's still there. And there are athletes in North Carolina, men and women, football to field hockey, that are earning money in this way. We also had an NIL world where deals were, in my view, essentially money laundered through collectives or through fake charities or other entities to pay athletes as a talent acquisition or talent retention fee. If you are a right tackle with 6 Instagram followers and you were getting $400,000 to speak at the Boys and Girls Club, it's not because you're especially charismatic. It's because you're a really good right tackle. And being a really good right tackle has financial value. So what we have now, post-House settlement, is we have universities that can pay directly up to around $20.5 million across their entire athletic department to athletes. But those athletes can also still earn money in excess of that through other NIL opportunities. So you have both. You have some pretty explicit pay for play, and you also have pay for marketing.
So with the settlement, there's this clearinghouse that some of these deals have to go through. Which ones do and which ones don't? And how do we know that it's going to be done fairly through this clearinghouse, that it's legitimate what they're saying?
We don't. On the latter. The way that the clearinghouse works is that if it's a deal that the school specifically is paying directly to the athlete, it is not subject to what we call a fair market value evaluation. If NC State wants to directly pay one of their basketball players, so long as they don't exceed the salary cap, they can pay whatever they want. But for deals that are done by somebody that's not the university, whether that's me, whether that's Adidas, whether that's a collective, whether that's any other kind of independent company, it's subject to what we call fair market valuation to make sure that the athlete is not being hilariously overpaid as a way of getting around the salary cap. That is run by what's a group called the CSC. It's not through the NCAA. It's administered by Deloitte, the gigantic accounting and consulting firm. And it requires every athlete who has a deal done from somebody outside of school for more than $600 to submit that information so they can see if it lines up within a range of acceptable compensation based on what other similar athletes are earning. A lot of economists and agents have said, I think this whole thing is an antitrust violation, and we'll see if it's sued and if it survives through litigation. Right now, it's only been operating for 2.5 months. It hasn't smacked down any extremely important deal, but the whole thing is kind of set up a little bit on thin ice, and I would expect there to be some kind of litigation by the end of the year challenging one of these rulings.
Yeah, if there's one thing we know, it's that I do politics normally, so political lawyers, if we know one thing, they're making a ton of money. Sports attorneys are going to be making a lot of money too for the next, forever.
No,
right?
the reoccurring joke on this beat is that the most dominant force in college sports is in Ohio State. It's not Texas. It's not Alabama. It's billable hours. Whether you're a university general counsel, whether you're a K Street lobbyist, whether you're an athlete agent, you have all done very well for yourselves over the past 2 years.
So speaking of thin ice, is the NCAA and its existence on thin ice then?
I think it's possible, right? You have a lot of tension right now in the NCAA between really two different groups, and these are groups that have been really battling since before I was born. On one hand, you have smaller institutions that are still part of Division I. Your High Points, your Campbells, your UNC Asheville's. These are schools that have athletic budgets of under $30 million a year, and are barely sharing any revenue with athletes because there's really not revenue to share. Then on the other end, you have the Ohio States and Michigans and Texases who have budgets of well north of $200 million, who would love to spend more than $20 million on direct athlete compensation, and who are, I think, in my view, for at least their major sports, are running things much closer to the NFL and the NBA. There's been a lot of tension over the past couple of years about whose interests should run the NCAA. Is it fair for the smaller schools to still have to share the legal expenses for stuff that the NC States and Ohio States did? And is it fair to still include championship access to schools at the bottom end of the revenue distribution versus the biggest schools who are driving more of that revenue? So I think it's entirely possible. The math eventually checks out to the point where the big schools say, you know what? I love being able to spread out my legal liability to UNC Greensboro, but now it finally makes financial sense for us to break apart and do something else. 10 years ago, I would have said that that's not very likely. Now, I think just about anything's possible in the next couple of years.
I want to talk some realignment. Before we get there, the day that we're talking, you released a article about the NCAA basketball game for video game. This is kind of becoming a big thing too, right? And it's interesting. Some of the players all have to sign off to make money and whatnot, right? And the football one came out with a lot of hoopla, but the basketball one might be in a little trouble.
Well, the basketball one might be in some trouble from one developer, right? There's only one company that makes college football games that we call simulations, or high enough quality to be like a Madden, and that's Electronic Arts. That first one of those came out last year. It blew away commercial expectations. This year's game is not selling quite as well, but still very well. And the universities and the athletes and the trophies and always other people get paid for use of their license. Right now, there's only one company that makes basketball games, and that's 2K. That's Take-Two, and they submitted a bid to make basketball games that could hit the market relatively quickly. According to my reporting, there could be college basketball intellectual property as early as this year's game that just came out last week. Around March, if it has standalone titles or standalone DLC potentially coming out in 2027. EA wants to make a different kind of game, one that would include everybody in Division I, men's and women's basketball, but they haven't made it yet. They haven't made a basketball game since 2018. They haven't made a good basketball game really since like 2010, 29. And they want an exclusive license to be able to take the time to be able to produce that. And according to my reporting, based on people I've spoken to in licensing companies, with schools themselves around the video game industry, is that schools are concerned that EA can't deliver that game on time and would rather work with 2K and get some licensing revenue now than signing an exclusive deal, having to wait a couple of years, and potentially having that game delayed. So it's entirely possible that EA doesn't end up making a basketball game and only 2K does, which would be bad news if you're a fan of, High Point or Greensboro, because that means you probably won't be in the game.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So there's a lot of talk about people saying like, this is killing college athletics and what it's been and, in the past. But, I was at the Carolina game, the first one, and Labor Day weekend, those games, there was so much hoopla around them. you could maybe make the argument the opposite is happening in some ways, right?
I think it depends on how you define killing college sports. So again, I would definitely say if how you define college sports is this purely amateur ideal where nobody was ever getting financial compensation to direct how they make a decision, that died sometime in 1903. Like we've had bagmen since Yale and Princeton were good at sports. We've had bagmen certainly, through my lifetime and your lifetime, and in that sense, it's never been amateur. And if we look at the health of college sports purely through television ratings, well, conference realignment and NIL hasn't changed that. If anything, the ratings have improved. If you go by ticket sales, the attendance across college football had been in decline for 7, 8 consecutive years. It's been up the last 2 years. So on that end, no, college sports isn't suffering. If we look at the finances of college programs, particularly those outside of the P2 or the P4, if we look at burnout within the industry, if we look at how maybe diehard fans feel about their emotional attachment to their programs, then I think you see something different. And how we define the health of this industry, I think, really depends on the metrics and who we talk to. Because what's working right now for Ohio State and what's working for DraftKings and working for ESPN might not be the same thing that's working for ECU.
And don't you think it'll level out the amount of money at some point? I mean, these people dumping money into schools that don't win or aren't doing all that. I just feel like that'll level out. I mean, there are Martin Baycots, who made so much money early on, the basketball player, great for him. But I just wonder at some point if that will shrink.
I don't think so.
No.
As crazy as that sounds, and the comparison that I would bring here is high level European soccer, which, like American sports, doesn't have a salary cap, and you're free to spend as much as you want. And what has really happened is, yeah, we've had spending dramatically outpace relevance to winning, and there are players that make way more money than you would expect based on how they do on the field. And what ends up happening is not that payrolls shrink and go back to profitability, as these high-level European clubs often don't make money. They just find a different caliber of rich guy. And now the people that own these clubs are Russian oligarchs and Middle Eastern petrostates and hedge fund managers in the United States. What honestly ended up happening, and I think we're already beginning to see this because salaries have just gone up. And I know for athletes over the past couple of years, there's going to be a lot of college basketball players this year who stink on teams that stink, who are going to make more than the athletic director at those schools. Like I'm not forget the UNC people. I'm talking about guys like at 11-win Big West teams. And it's just going to move to a bigger caliber of rich person. If Larry Ellison is willing to drop, tens of millions, not tens of millions of dollars in Michigan, I don't think it really matters if it becomes too rich for the blood of the car dealers that have been funding college sports for the last 2 decades.
That's fascinating. All right, we've got a few minutes left here. Let's talk realignment for a minute. Do you think the re-decision with the ACC that 3-5 years is just inevitable? A school like UNC is out.
I understand why people feel that way. And a school like UNC in particular, I think, is unique among a lot of ACC institutions in that it has the brand, the geography, the broad-based athletic program, and the academic cachet to be attractive to the Big Ten and the SEC. But what I would tell people is that I'm not completely convinced in 2031 there is a Big Ten or an SEC. If there is, could some schools in the ACC leave? Sure. Could we have a college football Series A where it's just 40 teams in some kind of super league and that's explicitly professionalized and BlackRock owns 35% of it? Yeah, I think that's possible. And then Carolina could be in that, and then maybe Purdue isn't. Could we have the federal government try to lock down and prevent some of these things from happening? It's possible. I don't know if it's constitutional, but it's possible. I understand why anybody would look on paper and think, yeah, Florida State, Clemson, UNC, they're all gone. But so much is changing with the core assumptions of how college sports works right now that I am not willing to say put anything in ink for what the sport looks like in 5 or 6 years.
And I was going to say in 5-6 years, we could, because people talk about the Super League and maybe football separate and all that kind of stuff. We just don't know, right? I mean, that's just the only way to put it.
We don't know because a lot of that depends not just on commercial interest from institutional investors, but it depends on what happens with federal law. It depends on whether higher education will be allowed to divest some of their intellectual property or real estate assets with a third party. It depends on whether the federal government's going to say athletes are not employees, so we know what the courts are going to say, and we're going to ignore them, and we're going to pass our own law. We don't know how state houses are going to respond to any of these things. We don't know what's going to happen with the global economy. And what seems like a good investment now might not be in 2031. I know it's terrible sports radio, but there are so many structural unknowns that I feel bad about trying to make, relatively milquetoast predictions about just 2 years from now.
Well, and politics is so unpredictable, and the truth is there's been some efforts to do things in Congress, and you mentioned the president, but we don't know what the appetite truly is, and the world's on fire at all times, so who knows the priority list?
The priority list, I think, is the bigger variable. What I feel comfortable saying at this point is that the politics and public perception around NIL and college sports regulation have changed over the past couple of years. There's a backlash, and there are. I'm very comfortable saying this. A substantial majority of congressional Republicans agree with President Trump that there should be some kind of structure or guidelines in how college athlete compensation works, which is going to result in the elite athletes in football, men's basketball making less money, and athletes in Olympic sports, athletes at the bottom of the pool, administrators would be making more money. We haven't seen a bill get passed yet. The SCORE Act is likely to get a full vote in the U.S. House. It actually has a couple of Democratic co-sponsors now, and I would say it's a heavy favorite to pass. Whether similar legislation can get out of the Senate is going to require some Democratic support. Ted Cruz has been working on that for 5 months. I think it's close, but to your point, we have we could invade somebody in 2 months, or some other gigantic political catastrophe could happen. There aren't single issue college sports voters out there. So this is not the biggest priority to most lawmakers.
Yeah, boy, fascinating. Thanks for putting it all in a concept for us in context. We appreciate you. Good to have you on.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
If you want to keep up with what's happening in North Carolina politics and hear more conversations with people shaping our state and beyond, check out the Tying It Together YouTube channel in the description. Hit subscribe and let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues that matter to you.